I now kind of feel like speaking in a hushed tone to you for our final speaker. I sort of feel like I'm an extra on CSI for this next gentleman. He has been trained by the FBI, by the US Secret Service. He is an extraordinary man who is an expert on detecting deception. Would you please welcome to the stage, where is he? Steve Van Aperen. The interesting thing, he's got a very quirky personality. He begged me, please don't call me Steve Van Aspirin. He is an expert on detecting deception with government agencies, with companies, and today he is here to talk to you about who is telling the truth. I am here to let you know, honestly, this man, Steve Van Aperen, is a dead set legend. Let him go. Who is telling the truth?
Thank you, Victorian. In 1996, I was a police detective, and I was always interested in psychological profiling, what made serial killers and serial sex offenders tick. So I was fortunate enough to go over to the FBI Academy in Quantico, but the more I got to know about profiling, the more interested I became in cognitive and behavioural interviewing. I wanted to know why, after 14 years in the police, I was not all that good at detecting when people were lying to me. So what I did was I did training in polygraph and so on. Then I thought, wouldn't it be great if I could have the ability and skill sets to work out when people were lying by analysing their body language? And later on you'll find out why I have no friends left. Remember this, but actually one caution before I start. Some of the things I'm going to talk about in the next 15 minutes, don't do to your friends or family, or you're not going to have any friends or family left. If you think I'm joking, I did a training session in Queensland for a group of barristers, and I gave that warning. And about a week after the training session, I got a phone call from one of the senior partners. And she said, Steve, you remember how you said don't do this to some of these things that you teach to any of the people that you're close to? I said, yeah. She said, I suspected my husband was having an affair. I thought, right. And she said, so I did what you said. So I'm scratching my head thinking, oh, geez, what did I say? She said, I asked him a good, direct, probing question. I said, are you having an affair? Now, if you forget everything I talk about today, remember this. If you ask a question and you don't get an answer to the question, go back and ask that question again. So she did. She said, are you having an affair? He turns around and he says, why would I be having an affair? Answered a question with another question. Big problem. She said, are you having an affair? Second time he said, this is ridiculous. I'm not the sort of person that would have an affair. And she said, guess what happened? I said, what? She said, I kept probing and he confessed. I didn't know what to say. I'm glad you got something out of my training. So don't do this to your friends or family or you're not going to have any. Remember this, for every one lie you tell, you have to invent another 2 or 3 to protect yourself from the first one. Secondly, you've got to have a great memory because you've got to remember, what have I said previously that could contradict me now? Neurologically, truthful people don't go through that process. If I got everyone down on this stage and asked you what you did this morning, neurologically, you would be relying on memory for recall. So you would be able to share experiences, feelings, thoughts, colours, conversations. Why? Because you lived through them. If you didn't through sensory input and you have to make it up, what happens is we see a number of changes. Remember this, I may be able to think of a lie, but can I effectively communicate it? The other thing is, I consult my services to different police departments and homicide squads and the media, and one of the first things I teach people is to analyse the content and structure of language. People will only tell you what they want you to know. They'll edit the information they give you. So 9 times out of 10, we listen to what they say. Now, if I was to ask Michael Jackson if he'd ever had facial surgery, he'll look at me straight in the eye and say no, when we can see. Now, often the question becomes the threatening stimulus. What I say to people is, if you don't ask the right questions, you don't get the right answers. A number of years ago, there was a case here, the murder of Jaden Lesky. And I was contacted in relation to that from 60 Minutes. And they said, Steve, we want you to do a polygraph test to work out whether or not Greg Dom Savage was involved in the murder. Can you ask him, this was before they found Jaden's body, can you ask him, do you know for certain where Jaden's body is? And I said, that's a bad question. What if he had an accomplice and the accomplice disposed of the body? What if he threw the body off a bridge and it's 20 kilometres down the river? He may legitimately not know where that body is. So if your question's not clear, it allows a deceptive person what I call wriggle room. And it's important never in any question to allow that to happen. Now, what I'm going to do today, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the things that we need to be aware of. I must admit, Bill Clinton and George Bush give me so much material to work with, it's not funny. When I said that people will edit the information, Bill Clinton said, whilst my answers were legally accurate, I did not volunteer information. So that tells me he's withholding information. People often lie by omission rather than commission. What they don't tell you is more important than what they do tell you. And the editing process takes place, and often, research shows this, that people won't lie to you unless they've got no other option. So what they'll do is they'll be evasive, omissive and dismissive, but they'll beat around the bush. And only when they're in that last phase that they've got no other opportunity, then they'll lie to you. Research shows us it is very difficult for the average person to lie, and lie convincingly. There will always be some telltale signs of what I call leakage or seepage. The problem is we don't look for it. The first thing I do, and I did that this morning in the green room before we started, I'll be introduced to somebody and I'll make a number of observations about their behaviour. Then I'll look for deviations from that normative behaviour. And often, 9 times out of 10, I'll show you shortly, with body language, we're not even cognizant of what we're doing. One of the things about body language is I look for conflict or contradiction between what a person is telling me and what their body language is in fact saying. And 9 times out of 10, we just listen to the content. Research shows between 48 and 53% of the time are we any good at spotting a liar. When I did my research for my first book, this is what we found. We found that most people deceive about 30 people per week, just in the average conversation during work. Imagine this. You go to work, your boss says, "Have you finished that file?" "Yeah, pretty much." That's a response not indicative of certainty. We are lied to up to 200 times each day. When I first saw that, I thought, how can that be possible? But think about this. From the time you get in your car, turn on your radio, drive to work, we've been bombarded with up to 100 commercials. I did a presentation. One of the things I look for is micro-expressions, distress signals. And I was asked to do a presentation to a group of plastic surgeons. I thought this was really interesting. I was looking in the front row, and there were a number of women, and I thought, there's something not right with this picture. And during the break, I went up to one of the ladies and I said, "Can you do me a favour?" And she said, "Sure, what's that?" I said, "Can you frown?" And she goes, "I am." Botox, absolutely no movement in her face at all. And I'll give you some examples of how expressive our faces are. The average is 7 times per hour if you count all the time people lie to themselves about their weight, how they're feeling and so on. We lie in 30 to 38% of all our interactions with other people. I just want a bit of a show of hands here. Hands up who think men make better lies than women. Hands right up there. Okay, hands up who think women make better lies than men. Okay, don't shoot the messenger. This is the research. Research shows men are twice as likely to hesitate mid-sentence during a deception. Research has also found that women are much more fluent with language at a younger age. And it has something to do with the cortex that joins both cerebral hemispheres of the brain, which accounts for multiple tasking. Women are very good at multiple tasking. But also they found that when women lie, their lies are much more elaborate, whereas men's lies are very basic. "Where were you last night?" My friend's place. So we need to listen to what people say. Furthermore, men pause more than 3 times every 100 words compared to women who pause only once every 50 words. So we're at a distinct disadvantage when it comes to the process of lying. Now this is really interesting. I've seen 3 variations on this study, and it comes down to what they did was they counted the number of words per day that men speak during conversations and the number of words per day that women speak. And this was really interesting. I found amazing. 3 variations, all pretty much the same percentage or ratio. On average, they said that men speak up to a maximum of 7,000 words per day, compared to women up to a maximum of 20,000 words per day. So not do women only get the last word in, they get the last 13,000 words in. Now, this was interesting. During their research, they found that men and women lied with equal frequency, but the very difference was the reason for that lie or deception. And what they found was quite interesting. Women were more likely to lie to make somebody else feel better about themselves, whereas men are more likely to lie to make themselves look better. No surprise there. And this was interesting. Under MRI scanning, research shows us that there's a lot of mental processing when we lie. When we're recalling memory, we only use one particular part of our brain. But when we're fabricating or embellishing, and when we want somebody to believe us, we want to buy credibility and believability. So we've got to think, what have I said previously? I don't want to contradict myself now. I want to sound believable and so on. And this is what they found under MRI scanning. Our brain lights up like a Christmas tree. Research in the US found that when we lie, we secrete chemicals from the tip of our nose, which makes our nose what? Itchy. So often, if you've got an itchy nose, what do? You scratch it, you give a decent scratch, not just a cursory touch. And I was at a friend's place a couple of years ago, and we heard a window break. And Ian goes up to his son and says, "Did you break that window?" And his son goes, "No," puts his hand over his mouth. Now, what you find in a social context, as we get older, if somebody asks you your opinion, you can't just say, "Well, no, why has he got his hand in front of his mouth?" So what you'll find at the last moment, there'll be a deviation in an effort to reduce the tension and anxiety associated with lying, and you'll see a last-minute change, like eye rubbing, nose tugging, and ear pulling. Hand-to-face gestures are very good and indicative of deception. Now, thanks, Brad, because I have the hardest job in the world to try to get volunteers on stage. After the last thing, it's going to be impossible. I need one volunteer to start with. So can I have a volunteer? Somebody put up your hand. Anyone who would like to volunteer? Okay. It's funny. People put death and public speaking up together, and some people actually put death ahead of public speaking. So can I please ask everyone to put up their hands? Everyone put up their hands? Everyone put up their hands? Fantastic. Now everyone put them down. Fantastic. I have a volunteer. Now, are you a good liar?
No.
I'm Steve Van Aperen and you're Danny. Okay, Danny, if I can get you to stand centre stage, and if Mr. Cameraman, if I could get you just a tight shot on Danny's face. Okay, thank you very much. Maybe a bit more distant. No, I'm joking. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do, Danny, is I'm going to ask you questions. I just want you to answer the questions truthfully, okay? I have to get behind the camera here. I'll just get you to stand there. Okay, everyone watch Danny's face. Okay, Danny, what was the registration number of your very first car? Stop. What just happened then? What happened? Which direction did they go? He's right, you're left. Now, one of the things there, thanks for that. How about a round of applause? Well done, Danny, that was easy. Yeah, that's all right, you can take a seat. Now, the point there is, the number of times I've heard people say, "He looked away, he must have been lying." Well, he in fact looked away before I allowed him to answer that question. Technically, he didn't lie. Why? Because he didn't utter those words. I didn't allow him to get to that stage. But what's important there, if, say, for example, he's looking in that direction to recall information, usually what you'll find when people are accessing the creative side of their brain, when they're going to lie, fabricate and embellish, they'll access the other side. So holistically, loss of eye contact on its own is not indicative of deception, but often of neurological recall. A lot of people make that mistake. Now, the other thing I need is another volunteer, maybe from this area. Can I have somebody come up? Okay. I'm really good at volunteers. Okay, let me see. Okay, the girl who's looking away from me, your name is? Hayley. Come up. How about a round of applause for Hayley? You know what the definition of a volunteer is? Somebody who didn't understand the question. Now, if you could just stand there, Hayley. Now, remember how I said before, what we need to do is we need to look for conflict or contradiction between what a person is saying, what their body language is in fact telling us. So what I'm going to do, Hayley, I'm going to ask you some questions. I would like you to answer the questions truthfully with words. However, at the same time, I want you to shake your head in the negative. You got that? Now, see the mental processing taking place? See how you go. Do you play any sports?
Yes.
Okay, I'm over here. Okay, what do you play?
Am I supposed to be shaking my head?
Yes.
Netball.
Are you good at it?
Okay.
Now, did you see her body language there? Often when you ask somebody a question, they don't know the answer. Usually eyebrows will go up, shoulder shrug, hands up. What happened there, at one stage I thought her head was going to fall off. I didn't know where it was going. Have a round of applause. Thanks very much for that. When I was in the police, I was interviewing this guy and I asked him the question. I said, "Did you take any money from that safe?" And he says, "No." Good indicator. The other thing we need to pay attention to is what we call qualifying statements. What's a qualifying statement? It's where some part of the person's response may be true, but they're hanging their hat on that. Another example. Years ago, I had to interview a surgeon, and the allegation was that just before the operation, he was scrubbing up and he decided to expose his backside to one of the nurses in theatre. So under Victorian law, it's a willful and obscene exposure, so I had to interview him, and I asked him this question: "Did you expose your buttocks to that nurse?" This is what he said: "I never, ever dropped my pants to the floor." Let's just analyse that for a second. Can you expose your backside without dropping your pants to the floor? Of course you can, to the back of your knees. What he said was factually correct, but he didn't answer the question. And that's what deceptive people do. They find some small issue of the overall question that they know they're being truthful to. I often say that there's no such thing as a bad interviewee, but there's definitely such a thing as a bad interviewer. Why? Because we don't ask the direct probing questions. To give you an example of how language can bring people unstuck, I consult my services to different police departments around the country, and they get me to analyse interviews and give them my opinion. Now, how people use language, the content and structure and the delivery is really important. So I teach people to look for 4 areas. Verbal, remember this, I can control what comes out of my mouth. Non-verbal, that's body language. Look for conflict or contradiction between what a person is doing and what their body language is telling us. Third is paralinguistic content. What does that mean? It relates to how the message is delivered. Could be things like tone, pitch, voice modulation, rate, response latency, ums and ahs. I often find when I interview people and people are fabricating or embellishing, we don't like pregnant pauses in conversation. So what you'll find is more fillers, unnecessary, superfluous fillers such as ums and ahs. And the research points that out. Now in this particular case here, just to set it up, Susan Smith in 1994 was driving her car in the US, gets to a set of traffic lights, stops the car, waiting for the lights to change. A gunman gets in the front passenger seat, puts a gun to her head and says, drive. So she does. She gets to the next set of traffic lights, he says, get out. So she does. He slides across to the driver's seat and takes off. Only problem is her 2 children are still in the back of the car. And it was really interesting, and I've got the tapes in my office, and what happened was, after she reported this to the police, she's walking out of the police station. As she walks down the steps, a journalist says, Susan, were you involved in the disappearance of your children? This is what she said, I loved my children. Now, one of the first things I look for is the use of tenses. If I asked you what you did this morning, relying on memory for recall, so you would be talking singular person past tense. You'd say things like, I woke up, I had a shower, I walked the dog. You wouldn't say I was waking up, I was having a shower, I was walking the dog, because that's present tense. Research shows us anytime there's a change between singular person past tense and present tense, there's missing information. Now, and trust me, if you've ever spoken to a parent who's had their child abducted, which I have, they will never ever speak in past tense. Why? Because the expectation and anticipation is that their child or children will be returned safe, alive and well. What had happened was, when she said loved, she's talking past tense. But what was even more telling was the next part. If you look at the top paragraph, this was what she said, Susan Smith. She said, my children wanted me, they needed me, and now I can't help them. Now compare that to David Smith, who was the biological father. His response, they're okay, they're going to be home soon. I want to draw your attention to the tenses. Wanted, past tense, needed, past tense, and when she said, now I can't help them, whereas he's saying they're going. So he's in hope that the children will be returned alive, safe and well. Well, interestingly enough, she admitted to police that she was having an affair with a much younger man, and he would not be prepared to take responsibility for her children. So what he did was he strapped them in the back seat of a car, drove them into a lake, she got out and they both drowned. The reason she was talking past tense is because she knew what happened to them. I was doing a conference in South Australia for their major crime squad, and they said, Steve, we'll just get you to analyse this statement. What they did, for those that love CSI, there's a thing called SCAN. It's called Scientific Content Analysis. And what happens is they say, what we'll get you to do, we'll get you to write down everything that happened from the time you woke up to the time you got home and found your wife's body, or whatever the circumstances. And it's really interesting. On this particular case, they found a doctor had been murdered in his surgery. And they, at that stage, all they knew, he had been shot at point-blank range. It was interesting because they said, we've interviewed one of the suspects, and they said, we'll get you to have a look at the statement. And I said, is it in his own handwriting? He said, yes. And he goes on, and what he does, he says, I woke up and I had to go to the doctor. I had to see Dr. Payesh. Dr. Payesh is a family GP. I've known Dr. Payesh for a number of years, blah, blah, blah. Then he says, at 9:28, we had a formal conversation. I said to him, go back and interview him from 9:28, because not only can I tell you the person who wrote this is the person who killed the doctor, I can tell you what time he killed him, around about 9:28. And the reason is because the change in language and structure. Firstly, he was quite formal, using a title, Dr. Payesh. Then later on, he said something along the lines of, he referred to him as him. The one thing I look for is when people create distance, disassociation and separation. Bill Clinton, I did not have sexual relations with that woman, Miss Lewinsky. Often, when I'm interviewing people, I want to see whether or not they maintain close or ownership of the story. I just got back from LA and I did a presentation over there. And while I was doing the presentation, I said to one of the executives from the Oprah Winfrey Network, I said, what I'm going to get you to do, I'm going to get you to tell me a lie. I want you to put as much detail, content and structure as possible. You can have an hour to concoct and fabricate and embellish, come up with a perfect story. So he said, when he came up with his story, I videotaped it. And he said things like this. Well, what happened was I went on my very first bungee jump, and what happens, you go there, they brief you. After they brief you, they take you to the ladder. You climb up the ladder, you get to the top, they tie your feet. I was on the edge, and it was really scary, and then I jumped. Now, the problem with that is there was no ownership. I would expect his language to reflect and replicate past tense, but ownership of that story as well. So when he said, you go there, he didn't say, I went there. He said, they brief you. Who briefed it? Then he says later on, you climb the ladder. He didn't say, I climbed the ladder. They tie your feet, not my feet. So often, when there's changes in tenses, there's often missing information. But 9 times out of 10, we don't look for those changes. The other thing we need to do is holistically look at how the message is in fact delivered. And I see this quite often. Channel 7 asked me to do a polygraph test on a guy who he alleged took photos of Pauline Hanson naked. And I spent some time with him, and 9 times out of 10, I can tell whether somebody's going to pass the polygraph test by the way they answer the questions. I'll use a behavioural question. One is, what do you think the results of this test will be? And I kid you not, his response was, no, I've never been good at passing tests. But there was no ownership or possession. I said, tell me, did you take those photos? He goes, yeah, I'm pretty sure I did. So lack of certainty and content in what he was actually saying. Now, just to wind up, I'm going to, just over the years, I've collected a number of things that have really appealed to me, and often we listen to what people say and we think, oh, that sounds believable. Why? Because we get a gut feeling. 9 times out of 10, you'll meet somebody through observations, you think, yeah, he sounds believable. But how often have you met somebody and you think, no, that doesn't sound right? I don't know, I've just got a bad feeling about it. Well, research shows us, just in facial expressions, I don't know if you've seen that program called Lie to Me, Professor Paul Ekman did a lot of research, and what he did was he found that our face is capable of producing up to 10,000 facial expressions. Up to 2,000 of those relate to fear, stress, distress, anger and anxiety. So if you know what to look for, it's quite obvious. To finish off, I love this. This was Senator Al Gore's response when he was asked if he ever used marijuana. Listen to this response. I don't think that's an appropriate question. If you ask me, have I done that as an adult in my career? The answer is no. That's a clear-cut, direct, definitive, succinct denial. Have I done that within the last 15 years? The answer is no. Have I done that anything beyond that? The answer is no. Did I experiment in college as a student? My answer is that's an inappropriate question. And I'm just going to finish up with the last one. This was Sean Penn's answer to a journalist about whether he urinated into a water pistol and showered a waiting crowd of photographers. Quote, I don't remember. I'd like to see it happen to certain members of the press, but I don't know if I ever did it. I would like to think that I didn't. I'm kind of thinking you would remember if you did something like that. Fantastic. Thank you very much. Thank you, Saxton.
Thank you, Stephen. Stephen Van Aperen, you had us in the palm of your hands. That was brilliant.
Thank you.
Now I'm really nervous about my body language. I was actually thinking about that TV show Lie to Me as you were talking. Remember that? Brilliant. That is precisely what Steve does.